There is a hidden force within you that quietly shapes your financial reality, and most people go their entire lives without ever activating it. Joseph Murphy taught that the mind is not just a thinking tool, it is a powerful magnet that attracts exactly what it consistently believes and feels. If your inner world is filled with doubt, scarcity follows. But when you learn how to consciously direct your thoughts, something remarkable begins to happen. Opportunities appear, ideas flow, and wealth starts moving toward you in ways that feel almost effortless. This is not luck or coincidence. It is the precise alignment of your subconscious mind with the frequency of abundance. Today you are going to learn how to switch that magnet on and make it work for you. The idea that the subconscious mind accepts what you repeatedly impress upon it sits at the very core of how human behavior, perception, and even external outcomes are shaped over time. Joseph Murphy often emphasized that the subconscious does not argue, question, or analyze in the way the conscious mind does. It simply absorbs, records, and executes. This makes it one of the most obedient yet powerful forces within you, quietly taking every repeated thought, belief, and emotional pattern as instruction. What most people overlook is that this process is always happening, whether they are aware of it or not, meaning that the direction of their life is being influenced continuously by what they consistently think and feel. When a thought is repeated often enough, it begins to carve a deeper impression, much like water slowly shaping stone over time. At first, the impact seems insignificant, almost unnoticeable, but persistence transforms it into something permanent. The subconscious mind thrives on repetition because repetition signals importance. It interprets recurring thoughts as something that must be true or necessary, and it begins to organize behavior, perception, and even decision-making around that assumption. This is why a person who constantly thinks about lack tends to notice more scarcity, while someone who repeatedly focuses on opportunity begins to see chances where others see obstacles. There is a quiet discipline and understanding that not every thought carries equal weight. A passing idea has little influence, but a thought that is entertained, revisited, and emotionally reinforced becomes embedded. The subconscious mind does not differentiate between constructive and destructive input. It does not label thoughts as good or bad. It simply accepts what is given to it consistently. This creates a responsibility that many people never consciously take on because it means that your internal dialogue is not harmless. It is formative. It is shaping the patterns that later appear in your external world. Consider how habits are formed. No one wakes up with deeply ingrained patterns overnight. Habits are built through repetition, through the steady reinforcement of actions and thoughts. The subconscious mind is the system that stores these patterns and automates them. Once something is accepted as familiar, it becomes easier to repeat. This is why change often feels uncomfortable at first. When you attempt to introduce a new belief or behavior, the subconscious resists not because it is opposing growth, but because it is protecting what it has already accepted as normal. Familiarity becomes its standard of safety. What becomes fascinating is how this mechanism extends beyond simple habits into identity. If a person repeatedly tells themselves that they are not capable, not worthy, or not destined for success, those ideas begin to solidify into a sense of self. The subconscious mind starts to align actions and reactions with that identity. Opportunities may still appear, but they are often ignored, doubted, or dismissed because they do not match the internal blueprint. On the other hand, when someone consistently reinforces the idea that they are capable, resourceful, and deserving of success, the subconscious begins to support that narrative, guiding attention and behavior in ways that align with it. Emotion plays a critical role in this process because the subconscious mind is highly responsive to feeling. A thought repeated with strong emotion is absorbed more quickly and more deeply than one that is neutral. This is why moments of intense experience, whether positive or negative, leave lasting impressions. The combination of repetition and emotional intensity accelerates the process of imprinting beliefs. It is not just what you think, but how strongly you feel it that determines how deeply it takes root. The challenge many people face is that much of their subconscious programming was formed unconsciously, often during earlier stages of life when repetition came from external sources such as environment, upbringing, and social influence. Statements heard repeatedly, experiences felt intensely, and patterns observed consistently all contributed to the formation of beliefs that now operate automatically. These beliefs can remain active for years without being questioned, subtly influencing choices and expectations. Awareness becomes the first step toward change, because you cannot alter what you do not recognize. Once you begin to observe your recurring thoughts, you start to see patterns that may have been running unnoticed. This observation is not about judgment, but about clarity. It allows you to identify which thoughts are being impressed upon your subconscious and whether they are aligned with the outcomes you desire. The moment you become aware of these patterns, you begin to shift from being a passive recipient of subconscious programming to an active participant in shaping it. Repetition, when used deliberately, becomes a tool rather than a passive process. Instead of allowing random or negative thoughts to dominate, you can choose which ideas to reinforce. This does not mean forcing belief instantly, because the subconscious responds to consistency more than intensity. A single powerful statement does not override years of opposing beliefs, but steady repetition begins to create new pathways. Over time, these new patterns can become as natural as the old ones once were. There is a subtle patience required in this process, because the subconscious mind does not operate on immediate results. It responds gradually, integrating new impressions through continued exposure. This can sometimes lead to frustration for those expecting rapid change, but the same principle that made old beliefs strong can be used to build new ones. Consistency becomes the defining factor. What you return to again and again eventually becomes part of your internal structure. Language also plays a significant role in what is impressed upon the subconscious. The words you use in your internal dialogue are not neutral. They carry meaning, and repeated language shapes perception. Statements framed in certainty are more readily accepted than those filled with doubt. Saying, "I am learning to succeed," carries a different influence than "I might succeed someday." The subconscious responds more strongly to clarity and repetition than to hesitation or ambiguity. Visualization can enhance this process by adding sensory detail to repeated thoughts. When you imagine a scenario vividly involving sight, sound, and feeling, the subconscious interprets it in a way that is similar to actual experience. This creates a stronger impression than abstract thinking alone. Repeated visualization can begin to familiarize the mind with outcomes that have not yet occurred, making them feel more attainable and less distant. It is also important to recognize that external actions and internal beliefs reinforce each other. When a belief is impressed upon the subconscious, it influences behavior, and that behavior produces results that either confirm or challenge the belief. This creates a feedback loop. If the belief is aligned with growth, the loop becomes empowering. If the belief is limiting, the loop can become restrictive. By consciously choosing which beliefs to reinforce, you begin to influence not only your thoughts, but also your actions and the results they produce. The process of impressing the subconscious mind is not about ignoring reality, but about shaping the lens through which reality is interpreted. Two people can experience the same situation and derive completely different meanings from it based on their internal beliefs. The subconscious mind filters perception, highlighting what aligns with its programming and often overlooking what does not. This selective attention plays a major role in how opportunities and challenges are perceived. There is also a rhythm to how beliefs are strengthened. Morning and evening are often considered powerful times for reinforcing thoughts, because the mind is in a more receptive state. During these periods, the boundary between conscious and subconscious becomes more flexible, allowing impressions to settle more easily. Repetition during these times can gradually influence deeper layers of belief. What becomes evident through all of this is that the subconscious mind is not a distant or abstract concept. It is actively involved in shaping daily experience. Every repeated thought, every consistent belief, and every emotionally charged idea contributes to its programming. The question is not whether it is being influenced, but how and by what. This understanding introduces a level of intentionality that can transform the way you approach your own thinking. Instead of allowing thoughts to drift without direction, you begin to recognize their cumulative impact. Each repetition becomes a small investment in a larger pattern. Over time, these patterns define not only how you think, but how you act, how you respond, and how you interpret the world around you. There is a quiet power in realizing that change does not always require dramatic action. Sometimes it begins with something as subtle as choosing which thought to repeat, which belief to reinforce, and which idea to give your attention to consistently. The subconscious mind responds to these choices with a kind of steady loyalty, absorbing what is given and reflecting it back through behavior and perception. As this process continues, the line between effort and natural response begins to shift. What once required conscious discipline can become automatic. New beliefs, once reinforced through repetition, start to feel familiar. They integrate into the background of your thinking, guiding actions without requiring constant attention. This is how transformation often occurs, not through sudden breakthroughs, but through sustained and consistent impression. The depth of this principle lies in its simplicity. The subconscious mind accepts what you repeatedly impress upon it, without resistance, without analysis, and without judgment. It becomes what it is told to become through repetition, shaping your internal world in ways that eventually influence your external experience. The moment a thought becomes infused with emotion, it undergoes a transformation that gives it a kind of momentum far beyond ordinary thinking. Joseph Murphy described this as the point where ideas stop being passive and begin to act as forces, shaping not only inner perception, but outward experience. A neutral thought may pass through the mind without leaving a trace, but a thought charged with feeling has weight, intensity, and direction. It lingers longer, repeats more easily, and imprints itself more deeply into the subconscious, where it begins to influence behavior and interpretation in subtle but powerful ways. Emotion acts as a kind of amplifier. It takes a simple idea and magnifies its significance, signaling to the subconscious mind that this is something important, something worthy of attention and retention. The subconscious does not measure importance through logic or reasoning. It measures importance through emotional intensity and repetition. When these two elements combine, they create a pattern that is difficult to ignore and even more difficult to erase. This is why emotionally charged experiences are remembered more vividly than ordinary moments, and why beliefs formed during such experiences tend to persist over time. There is a natural tendency for the mind to return to thoughts that carry emotional weight. Whether the emotion is positive or negative, the intensity creates a kind of gravitational pull, drawing attention back again and again. This repetition reinforces the thought, deepening its impression and increasing its influence. Over time, what began as a single idea can evolve into a dominant belief, shaping perception and guiding decisions without requiring conscious effort. What makes this process particularly significant is that the subconscious mind does not distinguish between emotions that empower and those that limit. It responds to both with equal receptivity. A thought filled with confidence, gratitude, and expectation can lead to constructive patterns, while a thought filled with fear, doubt, or frustration can lead to restrictive ones. The mechanism is the same in both cases. The difference lies in the nature of the emotion that is attached to the thought. This introduces an important awareness about the role of emotional states in daily thinking. Many people focus on controlling their actions or changing their circumstances, but overlook the emotional tone that accompanies their thoughts. Yet it is this emotional tone that determines how deeply those thoughts are embedded in the subconscious. A repeated statement without feeling may remain superficial, but the same statement infused with genuine emotion can penetrate much deeper. There is also an element of authenticity involved. The subconscious mind is highly responsive to what feels real rather than what is merely stated. If a person attempts to repeat a thought that does not resonate emotionally, the impact is often limited. The mind senses the inconsistency, and the thought struggles to take root. However, when a thought is aligned with a genuine feeling, even if that feeling is subtle, it becomes more persuasive and more easily accepted. The connection between thought and emotion can be observed in how individuals react to situations. Two people may encounter the same event, but their emotional responses shape completely different interpretations. One may see opportunity and feel excitement, while the other sees risk and feels fear. These emotional reactions influence the thoughts that follow, reinforcing certain perspectives while excluding others. Over time, these patterns become habitual, creating a consistent way of interpreting the world. Emotion also influences the body, creating physical sensations that reinforce mental states. A thought associated with stress may lead to tension, while a thought associated with confidence may lead to a sense of ease. These physical responses feed back into the mind, strengthening the original thought and creating a loop that becomes increasingly automatic. The more often this loop is repeated, the more ingrained it becomes, eventually operating with little conscious awareness. There is a rhythm to how emotional thoughts develop into beliefs. It often begins with a single experience that carries strong feeling. That experience generates a thought, which is then revisited and reinforced through memory and reflection. Each time the thought is recalled with the same emotional intensity, its impression deepens. Eventually, it becomes a reference point, influencing how similar situations are perceived in the future. This process can be seen in both constructive and limiting patterns. A person who experiences success and associates it with feelings of capability and confidence may begin to expect similar outcomes in the future. This expectation influences behavior, leading to actions that align with the belief. On the other hand, a person who experiences failure and associates it with feelings of inadequacy may begin to expect negative outcomes, leading to hesitation or avoidance that reinforces the belief. The interplay between thought and emotion also affects motivation. Thoughts that are emotionally engaging tend to inspire action more effectively than those that are purely logical. This is why people often feel driven by visions that evoke excitement or purpose, rather than by abstract reasoning alone. Emotion provides the energy that moves thoughts from passive ideas into active forces that shape behavior. There is also an accumulative effect. A single emotionally charged thought may have limited impact, but repeated emotional reinforcement creates a pattern that becomes increasingly influential. Over time, this pattern can shape not only individual decisions, but overall direction in life. It influences what is pursued, what is avoided, and how challenges are approached. The challenge lies in the fact that emotional responses are not always consciously chosen. They often arise automatically, based on past experiences and existing beliefs. This can make it difficult to change patterns because the emotional component feels immediate and real. However, awareness introduces the possibility of influence. By recognizing emotional patterns, it becomes possible to gradually shift them, not by suppressing them, but by introducing new associations. One way this occurs is through deliberate focus on thoughts that evoke constructive emotions. When attention is directed toward ideas that generate feelings of possibility, gratitude, or confidence, those emotions begin to accompany the thoughts more naturally. With repetition, the association strengthens, making it easier for the subconscious to accept the new pattern. This does not eliminate all negative emotions, but it changes the overall balance, allowing more constructive patterns to take hold. There is also a subtle relationship between imagination and emotion. The mind does not always distinguish between vividly imagined experiences and actual ones. When a scenario is imagined with sufficient detail and emotional involvement, it can produce responses similar to real experiences. This allows for the creation of emotional patterns that are not limited by current circumstances. By repeatedly imagining desired outcomes with genuine feeling, it becomes possible to influence the subconscious in a way that supports those outcomes. The timing of emotional reinforcement can also play a role. Moments of quiet reflection, when the mind is less occupied with external distractions, often provide an opportunity for deeper impression. During these times, thoughts can be experienced more fully with greater emotional clarity. This creates a favorable condition for imprinting ideas that are aligned with desired outcomes. There is a distinction between forcing emotion and allowing it to develop naturally. Attempting to impose a strong emotional state can sometimes create resistance, especially if it conflicts with existing beliefs. A more gradual approach, where thoughts are introduced and allowed to gather emotional significance over time, tends to be more effective. This respects the way the subconscious integrates new information, building familiarity through repetition rather than intensity alone. The influence of environment should also be considered. External inputs, such as conversations, media, and social interactions, often carry emotional content that can reinforce certain thoughts. Repeated exposure to emotionally charged messages can shape perception in subtle ways, contributing to the patterns that develop within the subconscious. Becoming selective about these inputs can therefore influence the emotional tone of internal thinking. There is also an interesting relationship between expectation and emotion. When a person begins to expect a certain outcome, that expectation is often accompanied by a corresponding emotional state. Anticipation of success may bring excitement, while anticipation of failure may bring anxiety. These emotions reinforce the expectation, creating a cycle that becomes self-perpetuating. Over time, this cycle can influence behavior in ways that bring about the expected result. The depth of this principle becomes clearer when considering how deeply rooted emotional beliefs can be. They often operate beneath conscious awareness, guiding reactions and decisions in ways that feel automatic. Changing these patterns requires patience, because it involves not only altering thoughts, but also reshaping the emotional associations that accompany them. There is a quiet persistence required in this process. New thoughts must be introduced consistently, and emotional engagement must be cultivated gradually. Over time, the combination of repetition and feeling begins to shift the balance, allowing new patterns to emerge. What once felt unfamiliar can become natural, and what once seemed unlikely can begin to feel expected. This transformation is not about eliminating emotion, but about understanding its role and directing it more intentionally. Emotion is not an obstacle to clear thinking. It is a force that can either reinforce limiting patterns or support constructive ones, depending on how it is aligned with thought. By recognizing this, it becomes possible to work with emotion rather than against it, using it as a means of strengthening ideas that lead to desired outcomes. As thoughts and emotions become more aligned with purpose, the subconscious begins to reflect this alignment in behavior and perception. Actions become more consistent, decisions become more focused, and opportunities are recognized more readily. The combination of repeated thought and emotional reinforcement creates a pattern that extends beyond the mind, influencing the way reality is experienced and engaged with. The notion that wealth begins in imagination before it appears in reality challenges the way most people interpret success, because it shifts the origin point from the external world to the internal one. Joseph Murphy consistently pointed toward the idea that every material outcome is preceded by a mental blueprint, whether that blueprint is consciously designed or unconsciously formed. What exists outwardly is often a delayed reflection of what has been repeatedly envisioned inwardly, shaped by patterns of thought that gradually influence perception, behavior, and decision-making. Imagination is often dismissed as something abstract or disconnected from practicality, yet it serves as one of the most influential faculties of the mind. It allows a person to construct scenarios that do not yet exist, to explore possibilities beyond current circumstances, and to rehearse experiences before they unfold. In this sense, imagination is not an escape from reality, but a precursor to it. It provides the mind with a reference point, a direction toward which actions can gradually align. When a person consistently imagines a certain outcome, they begin to familiarize themselves with it. What once seemed distant or unattainable starts to feel more accessible, not because the external world has changed immediately, but because the internal perception has shifted. This familiarity reduces resistance, making it easier to consider actions that align with the imagined result. The mind becomes less constrained by existing conditions and more open to possibilities that were previously overlooked. There is a subtle but powerful distinction between vague wishing and deliberate imagination. Wishing often carries a sense of uncertainty, a passive hope that something might occur. Deliberate imagination, on the other hand, involves clarity, detail, and repetition. It is an active process of constructing mental images with intention, returning to them consistently and allowing them to become part of the subconscious landscape. This repetition signals importance to the subconscious mind, encouraging it to integrate the imagined scenario into its patterns. The subconscious does not operate strictly within the boundaries of present reality. It responds to images and impressions, treating them as instructions when they are repeated with enough consistency and emotional engagement. This means that vividly imagined experiences can begin to influence internal beliefs in much the same way as actual experiences. Over time, the line between what has been experienced and what has been imagined can blur in terms of how the subconscious responds. Visualization plays a central role in this process, particularly when it engages multiple senses. A detailed mental image that includes not only what is seen, but also what is felt, heard, and even anticipated creates a richer impression. This multisensory engagement strengthens the connection between imagination and belief, making the imagined scenario feel more real and more attainable. The more frequently this process is repeated, the more natural the imagined outcome begins to feel. This shift in perception has a direct influence on behavior. When an outcome is consistently imagined, the mind begins to look for ways to bring it into alignment with reality. This does not happen through sudden leaps, but through subtle adjustments in attention and action. Opportunities that align with the imagined goal become more noticeable, while distractions that do not align may lose their appeal. The individual begins to move, often without realizing it, in a direction that supports the internal vision. There is also an effect on confidence. When a person has repeatedly imagined themselves succeeding in a particular area, they develop a sense of familiarity with that success. This familiarity can reduce hesitation and increase willingness to act, even in uncertain situations. The mind interprets the imagined experience as a form of preparation, making the actual experience feel less intimidating. This does not eliminate challenges, but it changes the way they are approached. Imagination can also reshape the interpretation of obstacles. Instead of viewing challenges as definitive barriers, they can be seen as temporary conditions within a larger trajectory. When the end result is clearly envisioned, setbacks are less likely to be perceived as final. They become part of a process rather than a conclusion. This perspective can sustain motivation and persistence, allowing progress to continue even when immediate results are not visible. The relationship between imagination and emotion further strengthens its impact. When an imagined scenario is accompanied by genuine feeling, it becomes more than a mental exercise. It becomes an experience that resonates within the subconscious. Feelings of satisfaction, achievement, or gratitude associated with the imagined outcome reinforce its significance, making it more likely to be accepted as a guiding pattern. There is a cumulative effect to this process. A single instance of visualization may have limited influence, but repeated engagement builds familiarity and depth. Each session adds another layer to the internal representation, gradually transforming it from a distant possibility into a recognizable expectation. Over time, this expectation can influence decisions in ways that align with the imagined outcome. It is important to recognize that imagination does not replace action. Rather, it informs and directs it. Without action, imagination remains unexpressed. Without imagination, action may lack direction. The two work together, with imagination providing the blueprint and action bringing that blueprint into form. This interplay creates a dynamic process where internal vision and external effort continuously influence each other. There is also a role for belief in sustaining this process. If imagination is constantly contradicted by doubt, its influence may be weakened. The subconscious receives mixed signals, making it more difficult to establish a consistent pattern. However, when imagination is supported by a willingness to entertain its possibility, even if complete certainty is not present, it becomes easier for the subconscious to integrate it. The environment in which a person operates can either support or challenge their imaginative patterns. External influences that reinforce limitation may create tension with internal visions of expansion. Navigating this tension requires a degree of focus, allowing the internal blueprint to remain intact despite conflicting inputs. Over time, as actions begin to align with the imagined outcome, External conditions may gradually reflect the internal shift. There is also an interesting relationship between imagination and creativity. The same faculty that allows a person to envision wealth or success also enables them to generate ideas, solutions, and innovations. These creative outputs often serve as bridges between imagination and reality, providing practical means of translating internal visions into external results. In this sense, imagination is not only about envisioning outcomes, but also about discovering pathways toward them. The concept of time plays a subtle role in how imagination influences reality. The subconscious does not operate strictly within linear time. It responds to repeated impressions, regardless of whether they relate to past, present, or future scenarios. This allows imagined outcomes to influence present behavior, even if those outcomes have not yet occurred. The future, as imagined, begins to shape the present in ways that gradually bring it into alignment. There is also a discipline in maintaining clarity of imagination. Vague or inconsistent images can lead to equally inconsistent results. The more clearly an outcome is defined in the mind, the easier it becomes for the subconscious to align with it. This clarity does not require perfection, but it does benefit from focus and repetition. Returning to the same vision consistently strengthens its presence within the subconscious. The process of imagination can also reveal underlying beliefs. If certain outcomes are difficult to imagine, it may indicate the presence of limiting patterns that resist those possibilities. Recognizing these limitations provides an opportunity to address them, gradually expanding the range of what feels conceivable. As imagination becomes more flexible, so does the perception of what is achievable. There is a quiet persistence in allowing imagination to take root. It is not about forcing immediate belief or expecting instant results, but about steadily reinforcing a vision until it becomes familiar. This familiarity changes the way opportunities are perceived and the way actions are chosen. It creates a sense of direction that may not always be consciously articulated, but is nonetheless influential. The connection between imagination and identity is also significant. When a person repeatedly imagines themselves in a certain role or achieving a certain outcome, they begin to incorporate elements of that identity into their thinking. This shift in identity influences behavior, often in subtle ways. Choices begin to reflect the imagined self, creating alignment between internal vision and external action. As this alignment strengthens, the distinction between imagination and reality becomes less pronounced in terms of influence. The imagined outcome continues to guide perception and behavior, while external actions bring aspects of that outcome into tangible form. The process becomes iterative, with each step reinforcing the next, gradually transforming what was once only imagined into something that can be experienced. The depth of this principle lies in its ongoing nature. Imagination is not a one-time act, but a continuous process of envisioning, reinforcing, and aligning. It shapes not only specific outcomes, but the overall direction of thought and action. By consistently engaging with it, a person can influence the patterns that guide their behavior, allowing internal vision to play a defining role in the creation of external reality. The idea that consistency in belief rewires your mind for financial success rests on a principle that is both subtle and far-reaching, because it suggests that the mind is not fixed, but continuously shaped by what it repeatedly accepts as true. Joseph Murphy often pointed to the notion that belief is not a static declaration, but a pattern that is formed, reinforced, and strengthened over time through repetition and emotional alignment. What is believed consistently begins to organize thought, perception, and behavior in ways that align with that belief, gradually creating a framework through which reality is interpreted and engaged. Belief does not emerge fully formed. It develops through repeated exposure to ideas that are accepted without resistance. At first, a new belief may feel unfamiliar or even implausible, particularly if it contrasts with long-standing patterns. The mind tends to favor what is familiar, because familiarity creates a sense of stability. However, when a new idea is introduced repeatedly, it begins to lose its sense of strangeness. It becomes something the mind recognizes, and this recognition reduces resistance, allowing the belief to take root more easily. Consistency plays a defining role in this process because the subconscious mind responds more to what is repeated than to what is intense but infrequent. A single moment of strong conviction may create a temporary impression, but without reinforcement, that impression fades. On the other hand, a belief that is revisited regularly, even with moderate intensity, gradually becomes embedded. The steady reinforcement signals to the subconscious that the idea is important, encouraging it to integrate the belief into its existing structure. The concept of rewiring is often associated with the brain's ability to form new neural pathways. While this is a biological process, it reflects a broader pattern of adaptation within the mind. Repeated thoughts strengthen certain pathways, making them more accessible and more likely to be used. Over time, these pathways become the default routes for thinking and decision-making. This means a consistent belief does not merely influence thought in the moment, but reshapes the way thought occurs altogether. When applied to financial success, this principle suggests that the way a person consistently thinks about money, opportunity, and their own capabilities plays a significant role in shaping their outcomes. If the dominant belief is one of limitation, the mind tends to filter experiences in a way that reinforces that limitation. Opportunities may be overlooked, risks may be exaggerated, and actions may be constrained. Conversely, if the dominant belief is one of possibility and capability, the mind becomes more open to recognizing opportunities and taking actions that align with growth. There is an interplay between belief and attention that further reinforces this process. The mind tends to focus on information that confirms existing beliefs, a tendency that can either support or hinder progress. When a belief is consistently reinforced, attention begins to align with it, highlighting evidence that supports it, while minimizing or ignoring evidence that contradicts it. This selective attention strengthens the belief, creating a cycle in which belief and perception continuously reinforce each other. The formation of belief is also influenced by language and internal dialogue. The way a person speaks to themselves on a regular basis contributes to the consistency of their beliefs. Statements that are repeated internally, especially those framed with certainty, gradually shape perception. Over time, these statements become less like deliberate affirmations and more like accepted truths, guiding thought and behavior in a way that feels natural rather than forced. There is a gradual shift that occurs as consistent belief takes hold. At first, actions may require conscious effort because they are not yet aligned with existing patterns. However, as the belief becomes more established, actions begin to feel more automatic. The mind no longer resists them because they are consistent with the internal framework that has been developed. This transition from effort to ease is one of the indicators that a belief has been integrated at a deeper level. Emotion contributes to the reinforcement of belief, but it is the consistency of engagement that determines its longevity. A belief that is supported by occasional bursts of enthusiasm, but contradicted by frequent doubt struggles to become stable. The subconscious receives mixed signals, making it difficult to establish a clear pattern. In contrast, a belief that is reinforced regularly, even in a calm and steady manner, creates a more coherent impression, allowing it to integrate more effectively. There is also a temporal dimension to this process. Beliefs that have been held for a long time often have deeper roots because they have been reinforced repeatedly over extended periods. Changing such beliefs requires a similar level of persistence. It is not a matter of replacing them instantly, but of gradually introducing new patterns that over time become stronger than the old ones. This requires patience because the effects of consistent belief are cumulative rather than immediate. The environment in which a person operates can either support or challenge the consistency of belief. External influences such as conversations, media, and social interactions can reinforce certain ideas, making it easier to maintain them. Conversely, environments that contradict desired beliefs can create tension, requiring additional focus to maintain consistency. Navigating this dynamic involves being aware of how external inputs influence internal patterns and making adjustments where necessary. There is also a relationship between belief and expectation. When a belief is consistently held, it shapes what a person expects to happen. These expectations influence behavior in subtle ways, often without conscious awareness. A person who expects success may approach situations with confidence and persistence, while a person who expects failure may approach the same situations with hesitation or avoidance. These behavioral differences can lead to different outcomes, reinforcing the original belief. The process of rewiring through consistent belief is not limited to financial outcomes, but extends to various aspects of life. However, when applied to financial success, it often involves shifting perspectives on value, opportunity, and capability. It requires moving from a focus on limitation to a focus on possibility, and from a sense of scarcity to a sense of potential. These shifts do not occur all at once, but develop gradually as new beliefs are reinforced over time. There is a subtle discipline involved in maintaining consistency, because it requires attention to recurring thoughts and patterns. It involves recognizing when old beliefs are resurfacing and gently redirecting focus toward new ones. This is not about suppressing thoughts, but about choosing which ones to reinforce. Over time, this choice becomes easier as the new beliefs gain strength and the old ones lose their influence. The role of action in reinforcing belief should not be overlooked. While belief influences behavior, behavior also reinforces belief. When actions are taken that align with a desired belief, they provide evidence that supports it, making it easier to maintain. This creates a feedback loop in which belief and action continuously strengthen each other. Even small actions, when repeated consistently, can contribute to this process by providing tangible confirmation of the belief. There is also an element of identity involved. As beliefs become consistent, they begin to shape how a person sees themselves. This self-perception influences decisions and priorities, often guiding behavior in ways that align with the established belief. When financial success is integrated into this sense of identity, it becomes less of a distant goal and more of an expected outcome, influencing choices in a way that supports its realization. The process is not without challenges, because inconsistency can disrupt the development of new beliefs. Moments of doubt, conflicting information, or unexpected setbacks can create fluctuations in belief. However, these fluctuations do not negate the overall process, as long as consistency is maintained over time. The cumulative effect of repeated reinforcement tends to outweigh temporary deviations, allowing the belief to stabilize gradually. There is a quiet persistence in understanding that belief is not a one-time decision, but an ongoing practice. It involves returning to the same ideas repeatedly, allowing them to become familiar and accepted. This repetition does not require intensity, but it does require continuity. Over time, the repeated engagement creates a structure within the mind that supports the belief, making it more resilient and more influential. The transformation that occurs through consistent belief is often subtle at first. Changes in perception, shifts in attention, and adjustments in behavior may not be immediately noticeable. However, as these changes accumulate, they begin to influence outcomes in more visible ways. Opportunities are recognized more readily, decisions become more aligned with long-term goals, and actions are taken with greater confidence and clarity. The depth of this principle lies in its simplicity and its persistence. The mind adapts to what it is given consistently, reshaping itself to align with repeated beliefs. Over time, this adaptation influences not only internal patterns, but external results, creating a connection between belief and experience that continues to evolve as long as the pattern is maintained.